Hello, today we are going to discuss how to critically analyze or evaluate a poem. This is Muhammad Anis and you are watching literaturely.com. The purpose of this channel is to introduce you to the great works of literature of the world. If you want to get regular videos on literature, then do subscribe our channel and also click the bell icon. Coming back to the topic of our video, that how to critically evaluate or analyze a poem. The first thing that you need to keep in mind that a poem is just like a piece of art that you need to decipher. And the things that you have for that is the words on pages. First of all, read the poem carefully and write down all the meanings of difficult word that you can do with the help of a dictionary. Before going into the detail of all the things, let me tell you briefly that what are the important ingredients of a poem when you are critically evaluating it. First of all, the thing that matters is the title of the poem. Then you need to find the subject matter of the poem. After finding the subject matter, try to explore the themes of the poem. And then, very important thing is the imagery of the poem, because modern poems are all based on imagery. You need to relate those images in the poem with the themes of the poem, and then you can explain why these themes have been inculcated in the poem. After analyzing the imagery, you need to talk about the language of the poem, and then you need to talk about the techniques, the rhyme scheme and other things of the poem. So let's have a recap. Title of the poem, then the subject matter of the poem, then the themes of the poem, then the imagery of the poem, then you need to talk about the language of the poem, then other techniques that have been used by the poet, and finally you need to give a conclusion. That is all about critical evaluation of the poem. Now we will discuss how these things are to be analyzed or found or deciphered in the poem. So when we are going to start analyzing that poem, it is already known that you have read the poem and you have read the apparent meaning of the poem, that what the poet is saying. Then we start looking into the depth of the poem. So let's talk about the title first. Title is the most important thing in a poem. It's just like a door that takes you into the right way. Let's take an example that there are 5 or 6 doors. If you enter into a wrong door, you can go into the wrong way. So it is very important that you find the right door. It means you evaluate or analyze the title of the poem in a right way. See, there can be different types of titles. A title can be very direct. It is directly corresponding to the subject matter and to the structure of the poem. It can be indirect, it can be symbolic, it can be ironic. So these are different types of titles that different poems can have. Now it's you who have to find out after reading the poem that what is the relation between the poem and its title. Let's take the example of a poem, Liar by W.H. Davies. The meaning of word liar is to have free time, but the whole poem talks about having no time. Modern man is busy and leading a mechanical life. So this title is ironic. Similarly, there can be titles which are symbolic and symbolically representing some other idea other than the poem apparently is conveying. After analyzing the title of the poem, now you are on right track. Now you need to find what is the subject matter of the poem. When we say subject matter, we mean what is the poem about in general. Is it about nature or about man or women? It is a broader perspective of the poem. You need to tell that what is the perspective of the poem, or what is the central idea of the poem. Central idea not in the thematic sense, but generally what truth the poem deals with. Like, is it talking about literature? Is it talking about nature? Or is it talking about man? It can be fiction. It can be anything that is the subject matter of the poem. Again, taking the example of poem Liar, the subject matter of this poem is nature and man. The poet is trying to establish a relationship of man and nature. So we need to find in this way what is the subject matter of a poem if we want to analyze that poem in a critical way. The next step is to find out the themes of the poem. Definitely you have read the poem, you have understood the apparent meaning of the poem. From apparent meaning, you can go into the depth and you can find the meaning. But when you find the themes, you need to prove it. That we discuss in the later part. But generally, you find the themes. For example, the poem Liar, its theme is mechanical nature of life of modern man. Its theme that man has no time to see the beauty of nature. So beauty of nature, lack of time, mechanical nature of life are all themes of this poem. Now, the next step is to find and discuss the imagery of the poem. That is the core and heart of any poem, because modern poetry consists of images, images, images. Because the poets are conveying their ideas not through a story, not through a plot, but through different images. These images can be scattered, these images can be well connected, well arranged, but it's up to the poet that how he puts his imagery. But as a student or as a critical thinker, you need to relate these images no matter how chaotic they are, how disconnected they are. So the very important element is to analyze, decipher and critically evaluate the imagery of the poem, because whatever themes you are saying this poem has, they all need to be proved through the imagery of the poem. If you don't have any logic, if you don't have any argument, if you can't connect those images with the themes, you can never prove your idea. Because literature is something very relative. Any person can perceive any meaning from a poem. We can't contain the minds of the people who are reading the poem. But whatever idea you put forward, you need to prove it. How you prove it? You prove it through the images of the poem. So before you discuss imagery, before you talk about deciphering those images, you need to know what an image is, because it is for students who critically evaluate different poems in their courses. So I need to define what an image is. An image is a word picture. A word picture. It means whatever object a poet brings into a poem, it becomes an image. And only these images can take you to the mind of the poem, or to the theme of the poem, or to the core of the poem. Like sun, flower, wall, curtain, door, window, these all are images. So when you start reading a poem, try to underline those images used by the poet. There are different types of images, or we may say that there are different types of imagery. For example, images can be audio, images can be visual, images can be tactile, images can be gustatory. So these images are actually related to our five senses. We have five senses and there are five types of images. For example, we see things. Actually, the poet through these images is making you see those things. So when we see something, it's a visual image. When we hear something, when a word is used that has some kind of sound or that refers to a sound, that becomes an audio image. So there is a visual image, there is an audio image, and there can also be a tactile image. A tactile image refers to touch. If a poet is giving a sense of touch, that image would be a tactile image. And then there is olfactory image. Olfactory image is related to our sense of smell. If the poet is talking about the scent of a flower or anything that is related to the sense of smell, he is using olfactory image. And if he's using some gustatory image is related to our sense of taste. If he's talking about the taste of something, he is using a gustatory image. So there are five senses, there are five images: visual, audio, tactile, gustatory and olfactory. As a student of literature, you must know what are the types of images. When you are writing a critical appreciation of a poem, you need to mention what types of images have been used by the poet. For example, the Romantic poets mostly used the images which are appealing to all our senses. Keats is a sensuous poet. Why? Because his poetry appeals to all our senses. Some poets can use one sort of image, one type of image, for example, that is appealing only to our sense of sight. We can say that it is a visual poem. Another poet can use only audio images. So it varies from one poet to another. But as a student, you need to understand and you need to find out what type of images have been used by the poet. You are done with the title, you have found the subject matter, you have discussed the theme, not discussed exactly, but you have mentioned the themes of the poem. Now it's the time to relate these themes with the imagery of the poem. Now I'm going to take Layer as example to relate themes with the imagery of the poem. So now we are going to relate the images of the poem Layer with the themes of the poem. For example, in first two stanzas he has used the image of sheep and cows and squirrels, and he is trying to contrast it with the lifestyle of modern man. He has no time. We have already talked about the theme, that the major theme of this poem is the mechanical nature of time. How this life is mechanical, because man has gone away from the world of nature. He is obsessed with his own purpose of life, with the progress, with the development, with the materialism. That's why he is ignoring the beautiful aspects of life. He cannot see when the sheep and cows are sitting under the shadow of trees. He cannot see where the squirrels are hiding their nuts. So it's really alarming that man has gone detached from the world of nature. That's why he says, what is this life if full of care? So the cares of life, the worries of life are the theme of this poem. And how we can see that these are the themes of the poem? How can we say that mechanical nature of life is the theme of the poem? Because the poet is clearly suggesting that man is always obsessed with his own world, that concrete world, and he is nothing to do with the world of nature, and he is ignoring the little phenomenon of nature. In the next stanzas, he uses the images of a running stream, he uses the image of night, stars, and also uses the image of a beautiful dancing girl. These all images can be related one after the other. He is actually trying to say that man is too busy to pay attention to these beautiful phenomena of nature. Not only nature, but even a human being, a beautiful girl that can be very charming for a man. He has no time to look at her smile. That's the smile that begins from her eyes and ends at her lips. It's very alluring and charming phenomenon, but he's so much obsessed with his own business that he cannot pay attention and he cannot smile back at that beautiful girl. And in the last stanza, he answers the question that he asked in the first stanza, that what is this life if full of cares? Yes, he says it is a poor life. If we do not pay attention towards the beautiful objects of nature, if we cut ourselves down from the world of nature, and if we detach ourselves from the world of nature, our life will become full of worries, cares, and it is a miserable and poor life. So he is suggesting that man should spare some time from his own business, from his own busyness, and he should come towards the world of nature. It can be very soothing, it can be very comforting, and his worries can be lessened. So we have analyzed all the images and we have related it with the theme of the poem. So this is how we can have an overall idea, or we can analyze or evaluate a poem by deciphering different images and by relating it to the themes and themes to the subject matter of the poem, and then overall poem can be related to the title of the poem again. So in this poem, mostly the poet has used visual imagery. So we can say it's a visual poem in which the poet wants you to see different things, different objects of nature, and the behavior of modern man, that how he is actually reacting to all these beautiful phenomena of nature. So we have done the title, we have found the subject matter of the poem, we have discussed the themes of the poem, and then we have also related these themes to the images of the poem. So we are done with a major part of the poem. Now we need to discuss what kind of language has been used by the poet. The language of the poem is quite plain, simple, and it's also romantic because he has used beautiful images, and there is no complication about that. The poem is not very complex, language is not very complex. He has made use of direct images, and there is a personification of beauty, that how beauty dances. So only there is one literary device he has used, that is personification, and other than that it's very simple poem, a very effective language, beautiful and romantic language. So you need to comment on language. So after discussing the imagery, language is very important. You need to discuss what kind of language has been used by the poet, and you need to find out the rhyme scheme of the poem. It's not mandatory, but if you are a high school student or intermediate student, then you can mention that what kind of rhyme scheme has been used. Rhyme scheme is the repeating sounds at the end of every line. You can find the detail, but after discussing the imagery, you need to discuss language, its rhyme scheme, and then finally you need to get the conclusion that what the poem overall was about and what were its theme. In one paragraph, you can tell overall the main idea and the things that you have found out about the poem. So that is all about critical evaluation of a poem or critical analysis of the poem. I hope this video would help you a lot when you are actually going to analyze a poem. So keep all these things in mind when you are evaluating a poem. Let me have a quick recap of all these things that we have discussed. The title, then the subject matter of the poem, then the themes of the poem, then the imagery of the poem, then the language of the poem, and then last but not the least, the conclusion. That's all from me in today's video. So that is all from my side. I hope this video is going to be very informative and useful for all the students of literature. So if you have any comments, so do comment in our comment section, and also subscribe our channel and click the bell icon. So bye bye from my side. Take care.